We're gonna run those crazy bald heads out of town. We're gonna run those crazy bald heads out of town. The crazy bald heads. The crazy bald heads. Hey family, good morning to you. Good afternoon, whatever side of the diaspora that you may be on. I'd like to welcome you to the Mental House with me, your host, Khadija. My mentors are being free. They're being free now because truth is all over the planet. And if you're not on board with it, you will be left behind. I am beginning to understand that more and more as I age. Okay? Like fine wine. It's really important that, I gave a video a little earlier about Ibrahim Traore and the West's desire to remove him from office because he is not dealing with the colonizer anymore in his country, and he's trying to get other African leaders to get on board with trying to get the Western world out of their business and to allow them to live independently because they can. In fact, they have so many resources. Not only can they live independently, they can afford to share some with you. And they don't mind. But the problem now is you took over and you want to take over and you don't want to share. You don't have that spirit. You have a spirit of control and dishonor. And so what is happening is all over the planet, the Western world is being kicked out, rejected, and just disrespected in some ways because the West has been doing business a certain way for so long. They're bullies. They bully Africa, the continent, for their resources. This picture that you're looking at right now is, I believe it's Ghana. But these are the kind of roads that Ibrahim Traore is responsible for seeing paved in Burkina Faso. Okay? Africa is beginning to wake up, the young people now, because the older people, their time is come and gone, and most of them are selling out. They have sold out to the Western civilization and the Western empire. But the young people who are realizing what their resources are, what has been going on through colonization for hundreds of years, they are educated. And a lot of them have been educated in the West. The bottom line is they no longer want to co-sign Western civilization stealing all of their wealth. And especially when they've been over here and see how African Americans live. And just the hypocrisy that goes on with the Western world. A lot of them now are appreciating that they are from a continent that can feed the whole world, that is self-sufficient. And now they understand why the white man always sent another black man, what we call Uncle Tom, to gather their resources, come in the name of Brown, but represent the Western agenda. The reason why Traore is so important, this man is in his mid-30s. This man has in 18 months did what no other African leader has done in years. In years. That is made Burkina Faso self-sufficient. They control their own resources. And the white man don't like that. The white man don't want you to control your own resources. Can't you tell how we were put down during the civil rights era? Fortunately for us, Lyndon Johnson knew that this was an idea whose time had come. And he signed the voting rights bill. But now you see the kind of demons that we dealing with today have taken those away. So now they want to go over there and steal our resources. For those of y'all who feel like you don't have a kinship with Africa, that's on you. You have ownership here and you have ownership there. Just like a Chinese man that is born in America has ownership or in China, or a German that was born here considers Germany his motherland. So miss me with the bullshit when you tell me that I am not a part of the resources, I am not a part of the life and the abundance of Mother Africa. But the clerk and all them are, man, I mean, or Elon Musk, God knew exactly where he wanted us to be placed. And we spread out from there. So what I'm saying is, again, without going into this too much, this man has just survived another assassination attempt. And I want y'all to check it out.
Burkina Faso just stopped a presidential coup, and no one saw it coming. The attackers weren't rebels in the bush. They were soldiers in uniform. And the masterminds? Not even in the country. And the government called it one of the major coup attempts they faced. But who tried to take down Captain Ibrahim Traoré? What did Traoré reveal after the attempt that no one is talking about? Let's find out.
Let me give a black culture.
The attack was set for Wednesday. Not a war, not an invasion, just a single surgical strike.
Black Culture Diary, their props for bringing this news over here. Again, that's Black Culture Diary. I appreciate this content. And if you want to know what's going on here and abroad, if you want to take your rightful place everywhere in the world that you belong, then it first starts with understanding the politics, right? America wants their resources. And if you ask me who I stand with at this point, I stand with Burkina Faso. It's not even a question.
One night, one building, one man. At the center of it all, the presidential palace in Ouagadougou. According to the Burkina Faso government, a full-scale overthrow had been scheduled to unfold with military precision. The plan wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy. It was designed to be quick, brutal, and final. Take the palace, silence resistance, and declare new leadership before dawn. But what made this plot different from every failed coup before it wasn't just the planning, it was the purpose. This wasn't about gaining power, it was about ending the order. Security Minister Mahamadou Sana called it a mission to sow total chaos. Those weren't poetic words. That was a tactical goal.
And y'all already know who the master of chaos is. Sound like Donald Trump involved?
Because chaos, when used correctly, does something power never could. It invites outsiders in. The conspirators didn't want to rule the country. They wanted to make it ungovernable. The objective, according to intercepted intelligence, was to drag the country into such deep instability that foreign intervention would be inevitable. The kind with peacekeepers. The kind with flags that don't belong to Burkina Faso. The kind that replaces local authority with international management. Or, as Sana chillingly phrased it, the plotters wanted to place Burkina Faso under the supervision of an international organization. They weren't planning a coup, they were engineering a collapse. But who were these people? The operation wasn't pulled together by a gang of dissidents hiding in the forest. It wasn't staged in a dusty garage or a rebel base. It came from men in the military, real men, with real ranks. Some were still on the government payroll. Others had vanished into exile but still held networks, influence, and knowledge of state protocol. They didn't break in through the front door. They knew the layout. They had access. They were the kind of people who would never be questioned while walking the palace halls. Which is exactly why they were dangerous. The planning had been underway for months, maybe longer. Not through backroom meetings or encrypted emails. These men knew how to keep things quiet. Orders are passed face to face. Notes burned after reading. Routes memorized, not mapped. It was a coup made from shadows. And yet, it nearly worked. But the failure wasn't accidental. Something, or someone, saw it coming.
Did you know that you can have permanent...
Whoa, did you hear that? Some saw it coming. Someone saw it coming.
Insiders say the takedown began with an untraceable phone call, an anonymous tip from a location outside Burkina Faso. From there, intelligence services moved fast, cross-checking travel logs, intercepting suspicious banking activity, and analyzing encrypted chatter between military bases and civilian phones in the capital. There were patterns. Too many officers are taking unexpected leave. A rise in encrypted traffic on military devices. A spike in ATM withdrawals from accounts linked to old regime loyalists. Then came a breakthrough. An informant passed on the intended date of the strike. With less than a week to go, the government acted, but not with sirens. No public warnings, no troop mobilizations. The response was as quiet as the conspiracy itself. They moved through the ranks like a ghost. Phones were seized. Military dorms were searched. Communications were wiped. Some officers were arrested mid-conversation, still unaware that the operation was over before it began. Sources say the mood in the army turned electric, nervous, unstable, crackling like a live wire. Trust melted. Schedules froze. Every commander was suddenly looking over his shoulder. But here's the strangest part. There was no resistance, no gunfire, no barricades, no defiance. It was as if the plotters knew they'd lost the moment. The silence that followed was heavy, too heavy to be called relief. Because even if the coup had failed, the people behind it were still out there, watching, waiting. The scariest kind of coup is the one that doesn't get a second chance, because that means it doesn't need one. It means everything was almost perfect. So, how close did they get? Close enough to trigger a full lockdown of the presidential guard. Close enough that President Traoré was moved to a secure, undisclosed location hours before the arrests began. Close enough that, had the tip come just a day later, Burkina Faso might be flying a different flag. This wasn't a clumsy grab for power by a few angry men. It was a coordinated military-grade operation with strategic objectives and geopolitical implications.
America.
And the more investigators pulled at the threads, the more they found connections far beyond the capital and far beyond the country. The plot had barely been foiled, but the war behind it, that was only the beginning. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe.
America?
Civilization and identity. Let's continue now. Now the question is, who was behind all this? Every conspiracy needs a trigger man. But the real power hides behind the curtain, silent, calculating, and always 2 steps away from the blast. As Burkina Faso's investigators followed the smoke trails left by the foiled coup, they began to realize something chilling. The fingerprints didn't just belong to low-ranking soldiers looking for a promotion. Number. These were men who once sat at the same table as the current leadership, who once stood during the same national anthem, who once saluted the very man they tried to destroy. This betrayal wasn't from strangers. It was from brothers in arms. Among the first names whispered through military channels was a former colonel who had disappeared from the radar 2 years ago. Discharged quietly after internal disputes, he had resurfaced, not in Burkina Faso, but hundreds of miles away, living in quiet exile. Not hiding, waiting, watching, and, as it turned out, plotting. His location, Ivory Coast, but he wasn't alone. Reports suggest he was part of a tight circle of ex-officers, some exiled, others simply detached from duty, who had begun forming what analysts are now calling a shadow council. No official titles, no chain of command, just shared purpose and deep resentment. They were men who had worn the system like a second skin. They knew the codes, the rotations, the blind spots. They understood which commanders could be bought with money and which could be swayed with ideology. And they had one thing most of the government's current enemies didn't: credibility. Credibility buys access. Credibility opens doors. Credibility lets you blend in. But infiltration was just phase one. The true genius of the plot was its attempt to control the mood of the army, not by force, but through psychological warfare. According to intercepted intelligence reports, these plotters reached out to religious clerics, tribal chiefs, and veteran community elders, not to recruit fighters, but to sow doubt. Doubt in the leadership, doubt in the war against insurgents, doubt in Traoré himself. Whispers spread in the barracks like fever. He's too young, too reckless. He's risking everything. Some said he was leading the country into isolation. Others said he was inviting ruin by turning away from the West. No direct orders, just suggestions, rumors carefully placed seeds. Divide the army in spirit, and it won't stand in body. But this campaign wasn't just internal. It wasn't just about changing minds in Ouagadougou. Evidence now points to encrypted voice memos and financial transactions traced to mobile accounts in Côte d'Ivoire, used to coordinate logistics, transfer funds, and possibly even procure tactical support from networks outside Burkina Faso. Which raises the question, who was funding this? Official channels have been silent, but multiple defense analysts believe the resources required for this kind of operation, the travel, the secure communications, the bribes, point to external backers, not necessarily governments, but wealthy actors with political motives. People who see chaos in the Sahel not as a threat, but as an opportunity. And for the ex-officers at the heart of this plot, opportunity was everything. For them, this wasn't just about vengeance or ideology, it was about relevance. Many had been pushed out of power during Burkina Faso's wave of military reforms. They had lost contracts, lost influence, lost the golden seat at the table where deals were made. They didn't want Traoré's chair. They wanted the entire room back. That's why they reached beyond the army. That's why they built networks that combined soldiers, insurgents, tribal figures, and political outcasts into a single silent machine. A machine with no logo, no flag, no anthem, but with one goal: undo everything Traoré had built. One name on the internal watch list, reportedly arrested during the raids, was a man known only by his call sign, Seydou. Once a tactical operations commander in Burkina Faso's northern defense zone,
but very
Seydou vanished
seldom
from the
were you
front lines
challenged
months before
on
the
being
coup
a good
was
partner,
exposed.
or
When
a good
security
brother,
forces
or a good
stormed a
son,
safe
or a
house
good
on the
student.
outskirts of
I've only dated
Ouagadougou,
two
they
athletes, so
found
I'm
him
not gonna
inside,
speak
with
generally,
maps,
but
radio equipment, and a list of active military personnel. Many of those names had already been contacted. Some had even agreed to switch sides, under the condition that the coup succeeded. But it didn't. And now, with the shadow network fractured, investigators are trying to understand the full scale of what was almost unleashed. Who else was contacted? Which commanders stayed quiet? How deep does the loyalty crisis go? These aren't questions the government is answering publicly. But behind closed doors, one thing is certain. The enemy wasn't just near the palace. He was already inside. And if a coup like this was possible, coordinated by familiar faces, carried out through silence and suggestion, how many more are waiting in the dark? Because the men behind this plot weren't outsiders. They were architects of the old order, still drawing blueprints, still building empires in exile. And just because one design failed doesn't mean the others are gone. Remember, in every betrayal, there's a sanctuary, a place where the plotters can speak freely, organize quietly, and move without fear of the spotlight. For the men behind Burkina Faso's near collapse, that sanctuary had a name: Côte d'Ivoire. It didn't appear in the newspapers. There was no official protest, no televised accusation. But in the cautious words of Security Minister Mahamadou Sana, the message was unmistakable. All the brains outside the country were based in Ivory Coast. Not one, not a few, all. And just like that, a diplomatic crack split the surface of West Africa's fragile unity. Ivory Coast, land of cocoa, peacekeeping, and business diplomacy, now found itself cast as a potential launchpad for insurgency. But this accusation didn't come from a place of paranoia. It came from patterns, subtle, undeniable movements in the data. Since 2023, Burkina Faso security analysts had tracked unusual activity along the southern border. Former military officials crossing into Ivorian towns and not returning. Private residences in Abidjan suddenly hosting strange visitors. Encrypted messages pinging between Ouagadougou and satellite phones registered in unfamiliar coastal districts. These were not the footprints of ordinary travelers. They were the trails of men preparing for war, far from the battlefield. Why Ivory Coast? It's a question still hovering like fog over the region. Some say the answer is geography, a relatively stable country with developed infrastructure and lenient monitoring of political exiles. Others point to economic pragmatism. Côte d'Ivoire has long been a hub for exiled businessmen, NGO consultants, and former officials who quietly pull strings across borders.
How seniors are getting safer tubs?
A country doesn't have to say yes to shelter rebellion. Sometimes all it has to do is say nothing. And so far, Ivory Coast has said nothing. No press conference, no denial, no investigation launched. Just silence. But silence in geopolitics is rarely innocent, especially not when two of the alleged coup architects, both ex-officers from Burkina Faso's elite regiments, were last traced to private compounds in Bouaké and Yamoussoukro, places with just enough distance from Abidjan to operate under the radar, yet close enough to access international routes, networks, and safe channels. Officially, there's no extradition treaty between the two countries concerning military exiles accused of political crimes. And unofficially, the web gets murkier. There's a growing suspicion that certain Ivorian officials, not necessarily high-ranking but well-connected, may have known who was on their soil and what they were planning. Whether they supported it is a different question entirely. In some cases, knowing and not acting can be more dangerous than openly choosing sides. But this isn't the first whisper. Relations between Ouagadougou and Abidjan have been quietly deteriorating since 2022, when Burkina Faso's military-led government began restructuring foreign diplomatic ties. While Mali and Niger leaned closer to Ouagadougou, Ivory Coast stayed neutral, maintaining open relations with France, ECOWAS, and Western financial partners. In the world of African geopolitics, neutrality can feel a lot like choosing a side. Some analysts even believe this geopolitical tension is less about coups and more about currency. Burkina Faso is pushing harder toward monetary independence, questioning the CFA franc and its colonial roots. Ivory Coast, on the other hand, remains a stronghold of the currency union. Two visions, one border. And that border is becoming more than a line. It's becoming a front. Border surveillance data shows a notable spike in unregistered crossings in the 3 weeks leading up to the failed coup. Individuals with no formal passports, using identity documents tied to international NGOs or civil society missions, were flagged, but not intercepted. In hindsight, officials believe at least 6 of those individuals had direct links to the operational planning of the coup. So again, the question returns. What did Ivory Coast know and when? No direct accusations have been made. Burkina Faso has not cut ties. There's no ambassadorial expulsion. But behind the scenes, channels are closing. Intelligence sharing has reportedly slowed. High-level calls are being missed. The usual formal smiles at border ceremonies have vanished. And the real fear now? The Ivory Coast wasn't just the host of this plot, but the blueprint for more. Because once a network finds shelter, it builds roots. It trains. It adapts. And if those responsible for April's failure remain untouched, safe, protected, or simply ignored, then the next attempt might not be a failure at all. Burkina Faso is watching, closely. And it's not just watching for movement across the border, it's watching for silence. Because silence, when it lingers long enough, becomes a message. And the message from Abidjan is getting harder to ignore. In the end, Burkina Faso didn't just survive a coup, it survived a warning. But warnings don't end wars, they begin them. What happened in April 2025 was not just about removing one man from power. It was a response, a strategic retaliation to something much larger. a shift in the balance of control. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, whether he intended to or not, has pulled Burkina Faso out of the orbit of those who once controlled its fate. And now, they want the country back. Not in name, in function. Since 2022, Traoré's decisions have redrawn the map, not geographically, but ideologically. With every move he makes, the country slides further from the familiar script. France was asked to leave. The ECOWAS bloc was abandoned. Western military aid was traded for local initiative. And in its place, a new alliance was born, the Alliance of Sahel States. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, a military-led triad determined to rewrite Africa's rules from within. But power vacuums never stay empty. As Ouagadougou began acting without permission, nationalizing gold, rejecting debt traps, and embracing a doctrine of non-alignment, a quiet storm began brewing. The international community didn't call it punishment. They called it concern. But concern quickly became isolation. Aid was withheld. Development projects were paused. The international press ran headlines about instability, lawlessness, and authoritarianism. Not because Burkina Faso was falling apart, but because it was falling out of line. The coup attempt, then, fits neatly into a pattern, one seen across the global south for decades. Whenever a state rejects the global order rejects the state. What begins with sanctions, bad press, and diplomatic snubs eventually mutates into something more. Internal dissent, foreign-sponsored media attacks, economic strangulation, and, when all else fails, a regime change campaign dressed as democratic restoration. Burkina Faso's real threat is not just from insurgents in the north or military traitors in the capital. Its threat is structural.
I saw a famous one arriving.
Y'all hear that? I mean, did you hear that? It is. It's structural. The long arm of Western world has been doing business this way for a long time. And they're not going to go quietly in the night.
Global. Because Traoré's model, flawed or not, threatens more than just old contracts or diplomatic norms. It threatens a storyline. The storyline that Africa must be helped. That sovereignty requires permission. That independence means choosing between two masters, never walking alone. By rejecting this framework, Burkina Faso didn't just break free, it embarrassed those who wrote the script. And when a country embarrasses a system, that system responds with everything it has. That response now moves through every layer. Security alerts from embassies warning of danger. International reports are predicting imminent collapse. Travel bans justified by threats that existed long before Traoré. Each headline, each speech, each quiet withdrawal of aid, all subtle signals to the world that this government must not be taken seriously. It's not just destabilization, it's delegitimization. Yet here's the irony. The more Burkina Faso is threatened, the more defiant it becomes. And the more it resists, the more others begin to watch. Not just Niger and Mali, but across the continent. From Ghana to Guinea, Senegal to Chad, a question is rising that no foreign policy can smother. What if Burkina Faso isn't the problem? What if it's the model? A model of bold defiance, of controlling your own resources, of rejecting the idea that African nations must be dictated to by Washington, Paris, or Brussels, of saying no and surviving. That's what makes Traoré dangerous. Not because he's a soldier with charisma, but because his survival might convince others that survival is possible. This is the larger war, not a war of guns, a war of stories, a war between nations trying to reclaim authorship and an empire that still believes it holds the pen. And this empire doesn't wear crowns or wave flags. It signs trade deals. It sponsors summits. It lectures about democracy while funding destabilization. It doesn't declare war. It simply decides who gets to lead and who doesn't. In April 2025, Burkina Faso was meant to be reminded of its place. But something unexpected happened. It said, no. It said, not this time. And now the world must ask itself, what happens when the nation that was supposed to collapse refuses to fall? Do you think world needs to take notice of this? Why do coups keep on repeating? Let us know in the comment section. Who do you think is behind?
Okay. Another failed um, assassination attempt, a coup, just like you notice that this is happening all over the world. This is kind of like what Barack Obama did to Muammar Gaddafi, um, except this this is not 5.0. The young people understand how and why you could send the United States military to present drama for Africa and collectively be the head of AFRICOM. This is part of the mission. To steal all the resources and to kill any black leadership that may stand in your way. That's it. I hope y'all understand a little bit more about what's going on in Burkina Faso and how that relates to us over here. I hope you can put two and two together and see it for what it really is. The elite is in the business of stealing resources from all of us, everywhere. And if you want some resources that are aligned in another place, then you have to do your best to put people in place in that government that are aligned with your thievery. And that way your transition will be easier. See, put a bunch of disgruntled folks in certain positions. And then they'll bring chaos to a peaceful situation. I don't know. Y'all tell me what y'all think about this. Do you think? And do you think that this is connected with us and them in the motherland? Let me know. I look forward to your comments.